Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The train screeched to a halt, jolting me back to reality. I stepped off, feeling the cold, crisp Chicago air biting at my skin. The city loomed ahead, familiar yet distant, as if it had transformed during the years I've been away. I tugged my coat tighter around me, trying to brace myself against the wave of emotions crashing inside. My father was dead, and I was back to bury him. As I approached the mansion, the sight of it hit me harder than I expected. The house stood tall, its imposing structure framed by dark, bare trees, and I could almost see my father waiting at the door, ready to welcome me back. But he wasn't there, and the house felt empty, hollow, like it was mourning too. Rachel opened the door before I could knock. She was impeccably dressed as always, her lips painted a cold, dark red. "Alistair," she said, her tone sharp and businesslike. "You're late." "I had to finish some things," I replied, trying to sound steady, though my voice wavered. "Not everything can wait, you know," she said, narrowing her eyes slightly. "Your father's gone, and we need to get things in order." Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. Arguing with Rachel would get me nowhere. Instead, I just nodded and followed her inside, dragging my suitcase along. The interior of the house was just as I remembered, elegant, but with a coldness that Rachel had brought into it over the years. My father had once filled this place with warmth, with life. Now, it felt like a tomb. The funeral was held the next morning, a quiet, somber affair. The priest's words faded in and out, barely reaching me through the haze of grief. I watched as people offered their condolences, but my eyes kept drifting back to Rachel. She was immaculate, barely shedding a tear, standing next to the casket like a guard. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, and that thought sent a chill down my spine. After the service, I lingered by the grave, waiting until everyone had left. I needed a moment alone with him, a chance to say goodbye. As I crouched beside the grave, I noticed a small white envelope partially hidden under a bouquet of lilies. My name was scrawled across it in a hurried, familiar script. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. I could still see Rachel standing by the car, talking to a few distant relatives. She glanced at me briefly, and I quickly turned away, my pulse racing. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, pulling out a single sheet of paper. My father's handwriting covered it, a little shaky but unmistakably his. "Alistair, I know you've been away, and I understand why. But if you're reading this, I need you to listen. There's something you must know about Rachel. She's planning something that could destroy everything I've built. I can't explain everything here, but be careful. Keep this quiet and trust no one. Follow the clues I've left for you." I read the letter again, my mind reeling. Rachel plotting something. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to think that grief was making me imagine things. But why would he write this if it wasn't true? I looked up, catching sight of Rachel once more, her face a mask of calm, yet somehow more unsettling than ever. Was she really capable of such betrayal? I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket, a knot tightening in my chest. I felt like I had swallowed a shard of ice. There was so much I didn't understand, but one thing was clear. My father was trying to tell me something, even from beyond the grave. I couldn't ignore that. As I turned to leave, Rachel approached me, her heels crunching softly on the gravel. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp, searching mine. "We need to discuss the estate." "Yes, I'm ready," I said, forcing a smile. "Just needed a moment." "Good," she said, giving a small, tight smile. "There's a lot to go over, and I'd hate to keep you in the dark." I met her gaze, the weight of my father's warning heavy on my mind. "I appreciate that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though the words tasted bitter. "I'm sure there's a lot I need to catch up on." As we walked back to the car, I couldn't help but feel like I was stepping into a trap, and Rachel was the one holding the strings. But I wasn't going to let her pull them without a fight. The house was eerily quiet that evening, shadows creeping along the walls as dusk settled over Chicago. I sat in my father's study, a room I hadn't dared enter in years. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, a mix of cedar and something crisp and clean, like mint. My father had spent countless nights here, poring over documents, lost in his thoughts. Now, it was up to me to uncover whatever secrets he had left behind. I pulled the letter from my coat pocket and read it again, my eyes catching on the words, "Follow the clues I've left for you." What clues? I glanced around the room, searching for anything that felt out of place, but everything seemed normal. Neat stacks of paper, books perfectly aligned on the shelves, his old leather chair sitting stoically behind the oak desk. I stood running my hands over the spines of the books. My father had always been a meticulous man, a stickler for order, but something about this room felt off. I was about to turn away when my fingers brushed against a hardcover that was slightly tilted. I pulled it out, and the bookcase slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a small metal safe embedded in the wall. My breath itched. A hidden safe? What was so important that he had to keep it hidden, even from Rachel? My hands shook as I tried to think. Did he ever mention the combination? I closed my eyes, racking my brain, and then it came to me, my birth date. It was worth a try. I punched in the numbers, and after a tense pause, the lock clicked open. Inside the safe was a bundle of documents and a USB drive. I carefully unfolded the top sheet, my heart pounding. They were financial records, accounts, transactions, payments, and they all had Rachel's name on them, alongside another one that caught my eye. Clara Hastings. My father had mentioned her once in passing. Rachel's estranged sister. But why was her name here? What were they doing? As I flipped through the documents, I heard the creak of the floorboards outside the study. My heart stopped. I quickly shut the safe, pushing the bookcase back into place, and pocketed the USB drive. The doorknob turned, and Rachel stepped in, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. I forced a casual smile, leaning back against the desk. "Just looking through some of Dad's things," I said, trying to make sense of everything. She crossed her arms, the faintest hint of a smirk on her lips. "You always were curious, weren't you?" she said, her eyes lingering on me a little too long. "Well, I hope you find what you're looking for. Just remember, some things are better left buried." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sure you're right," I replied, "but I need to understand, for his sake." Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said softly, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something darker beneath her calm facade. "Just don't let it consume you, Alistair. We wouldn't want that." As she turned to leave, I let out a slow breath, my mind racing. She was hiding something, I was sure of it. Whatever my father had found out, it was dangerous enough that he felt the need to keep it hidden, and now it was up to me to figure out why. It was late, almost midnight, when I finally returned to the apartment we're temporarily renting in Chicago. Lauren was waiting for me, perched on the edge of the sofa, her arms folded and her eyes sharp. I could tell she had been rehearsing this confrontation. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I hesitated, my mind still spinning from the discovery in my father's study. "At the house," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady, going through Dad's things. "Right," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" I took a step closer, feeling the tension coil between us. "Why wouldn't you?" I asked, my patience slipping. "My father just died, Lauren. I'm trying to understand what happened." She stood up, her eyes blazing. "You're trying to make it about you," she shot back. "You were never around when he was alive, and now you show up like the grieving son, acting like you care. It's pathetic." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "You know nothing about what I'm dealing with right now." "Do I?" she snapped. "You're shutting me out, Alistair. You don't talk, you don't explain, and I'm left here to guess what's going on in that head of yours." She took a deep breath, her voice lowering, but the edge remained. "If you keep this up, I don't know how much longer I can do this." The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. I wanted to tell her about the letter, the safe, the documents I'd found. But I couldn't. Not yet. If Rachel knew I was onto her, she'd do everything in her power to stop me. I couldn't risk it, even if it meant pushing Lauren further away. "Lauren," I said, forcing a call I didn't feel, "I just need a little more time. Please." She studied me, her gaze cold and distant. "Time for what? To chase shadows?" She shook her head. "You're losing yourself in this. You're losing me." Her words stung more than I expected. I realized then that this wasn't just about Rachel's schemes. It was tearing apart my marriage, and I wasn't sure I could fix it. I reached out, but she stepped back, avoiding my touch. "Fine," she said. "Take your time, Alistair. But don't be surprised if I'm not here when you finally figure out what you want." She left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. I pulled it out, expecting a message from Lauren, but it was from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." A chill ran down my spine. It seemed Rachel wasn't the only one watching. The next morning, I met Victor at a small cafe on Michigan Avenue. The sun had barely risen, and the city was still waking up, but my mind was already racing. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I spotted Victor near the window, stirring his coffee, his expression serious. He had always been the level-headed one, the guy who kept me grounded. I hoped he could help me now. Morning, he said as I slid into the seat opposite him. You look like Al. Thanks, I muttered, forcing a weak smile. I need a favor. Victor's brow furrowed. This about your dad's business. I glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. It's about Rachel, I said, my voice low. I found something in my dad's office. Documents at USB drive, things that don't add up. I think she's been siphoning money, and she's not working alone. Victor's eyes widened, but he quickly regained his composure. You're sure about this? I nodded. There's more. Last night, I got a text message. It was a warning, telling me to stop digging. I handed him my phone, showing him the message. Someone knows I'm onto them. He studied the screen, his expression darkening. This is serious, Alistair. If Rachel's involved in something illegal, and they're sending threats, you need to be careful. I know, I said, leaning in closer. That's why I need your help. I need to figure out what's on that USB, and I need to do it without Rachel finding out. Victor sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, he said finally. I'll take a look, but you have to be smart about this. If they're watching you, you can't afford to make a wrong move. I felt a surge of relief. Thanks, Vic. I don't know who else I can trust right now. As we left the cafe, Victor's words echoed in my mind. We were standing at the edge of something dangerous, and the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. But I couldn't back down now, not when the truth was so close, and Rachel's web of lies was beginning to unravel. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed again. I half expected another threat, but it was a message from Lauren. We need to talk. A knot tightened in my stomach. I wasn't sure which conversation scared me more, the one with Rachel or the one with my wife. The next morning, I met Victor at a small cafe near the office. He slid into the booth across from me, his expression tense. I managed to decrypt the files from the USB, he said, keeping his voice low. You were right. Rachel's been funneling money through offshore accounts, but it's more than just that. There's a pattern, a scheme. It's not just money laundering, it's fraud on a massive scale. My heart pounded as I scanned the documents he handed me. This was bigger than I had imagined. Does anyone else know? I asked, glancing around nervously. No, Victor said, but this is dangerous, Alistair. If Rachel finds out we're onto her, she won't hesitate to cover her tracks. She could ruin you or worse. I thought of my father's letter, the fear in his words. He knew what she was capable of. I need proof strong enough to bring her down, I said. Something undeniable. Victor hesitated, then nodded. There's a detective I know, Hendricks. He's discreet and doesn't scare easily. I can set up a meeting. As I left the cafe, a dark car idled across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. For a split second, I thought I saw someone watching me, but when I looked again, the car was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever was happening, it felt like Rachel was already one step ahead. Victor had arranged the meeting with Detective Hendricks at a discreet diner on the outskirts of town. Hendricks was a seasoned professional with a calm, measured demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He sat across from me, his sharp eyes studying the documents I handed him. This is serious, he said after a moment, his tone grave. If Rachel's been embezzling funds on this scale, she's facing more than just corporate penalties, but we'll need more than these records to prove her intent. I nodded, knowing he was right. I need direct evidence, something that shows she's still actively moving the money. Hendricks leaned back, considering. We can set up surveillance on the accounts you mentioned, track any large transactions. If she's planning to transfer funds, she'll have to do it soon, before she realizes we're watching. A few days later, Hendricks's plan paid off. Victor and I received a call from him, his voice urgent but triumphant. She's panicking, he said. Rachel and her sister have been moving large sums out of the company's accounts, trying to hide the trail. We got it all on record. It was the confirmation I needed. Rachel's actions over the past few days have been erratic, canceling meetings, sending cryptic emails, and now, this desperate attempt to shift funds. She must have realized that the walls were closing in. But it was too late. I hadn't expected to find Rachel alone in my father's office, but there she was, perched behind his desk as if she owned the place. She didn't look up when I entered, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wood. It was a casual display of power, but I wasn't here to play games. Rachel, I said, stepping forward, we need to talk. She raised an eyebrow, barely suppressing a smile. Do we, Alistair? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've been doing plenty of talking behind my back. I felt a flash of anger, but kept my tone steady. I know about the offshore accounts. I know you've been embezzling from the company. She sighed, feigning boredom. I expected more from you, Alistair. digging through old files, snooping around like a desperate little boy. What exactly do you think you found? I took out a copy of the documents from my bag, sliding them across the desk. Enough to take you down, I said, locking eyes with her. And I'm not the only one who knows. Victor, Detective Hendricks, they're ready to act. Rachel's eyes darkened, and she leaned back in the chair, a slow smile creeping across her lips. You really think you can win this, don't you? She whispered. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've spent years building this. You're just a nuisance, one I can easily get rid of. The room felt suffocatingly still. Maybe, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, but I'm not going anywhere. And neither is this evidence. For a moment, I thought I saw fear flicker in her eyes, but then she laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You should have left this alone, Alistair. Now you'll find out just how far I'm willing to go. She stood up, towering over me, and I realized this was a warning, a final, veiled threat. But I had come too far to back down now. Rachel's empire was built on lies, and I was going to tear it apart, no matter what it cost me. With Hendricks' help, I compiled the direct evidence, documenting each suspicious transaction Rachel and her sister initiated. The moment the last piece was in place, we turned everything over to the authorities. Rachel was arrested a week later, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The news spread quickly, her image splashed across headlines, and the empire she had tried so desperately to control crumbled around her. As I watched the story unfold, I felt a strange sense of closure. My father's legacy was safe, and Rachel's deceit had finally been exposed.